All right, we're back here at Moment Machine. Another reporting video. Keep coming up with things I think we need to talk about. I'm trying to do this quick. This is really a takeoff of the last video. You know, when you're talking about stuff, it sounds good, but when you go back and watch it yourself, you're like, oh, that might not be as clear, or it's more complicated than that. And as I walked out in the shop and I started looking around at some different jobs I have in here, I started thinking to myself, I'm like, you know, some of these heads aren't 100% relevant to what I was saying. So real quick, I just wanted to go over this. You know, we talked about the expanding radiuses, and we still are, but one thing I wanted to say was that, you know, it's very common to have a very long radius in the floor like that and then go into your short turn. And so I know that will look like a descending radius, but I think what we're trying to get at is that if as long as the air is staying attached, as long as this radius is shallow enough that the air is staying attached to the floor before you make your brake, then, you know, treat the expanding radius, you know, from this point here. Because like I said before, there's so many geometries, guys. There's so many, just thousands of different shapes and castings that to try to, you know, put one 2D drawing into it is really tough. So I wanted to go back down here real quick and short side layback from valve stem. For beginners, you probably don't want to get much more than 12 degrees. And I kind of modified this drawing a little bit more to show what I was talking about, because I was trying to talk about this the other day and I was listening to it and I was like, that's a little painful. But you know, basically, if this is the valve, okay, if the short turn's standing pretty straight up or running parallel with the valve, that can be a really strong low lift flowing scenario, and it can work really good if you're using like stock cams or towing, or I mean, there's instances for it. But as you start trying to increase the lift, you know, so from the valve stem, you know, this is, we were trying to say, you know, the red line would be about a 10-degree layback, and the black line would be about a 12-degree layback. And you can definitely get more than that, but I would just say if you're starting out and you're beginning, just stick with that. You know, you gotta sometimes know a casting pretty well to start taking bigger steps. And then I kind of sort of reconstructed the other side, but you know, part of what we were saying the other day, and I kind of drew these out, was that as the valve gets farther away, the shape of the plume coming off, you know, has to project farther. So your bowl and your short turn shaping, you know, they start altering to sort of a different plume formation to reach a valve that's farther away. And then obviously, as you can see, sort of a wider plume when the valve gets closer at lower lifts. And then the last thing, this one too, I tried to recorrect this to some degree. We talked about lift the other day, and as I thought about it, I'm like, that's just such a, you know, one-sided argument. You know, what we were looking at was probably for a valve above 2-inch only in that graph. So I think we're a lot better off to look at it in a lift to diameter ratio. Okay, and then the amount of degrees in the short turn radius will have a strong effect on high lift flow. So I wanted to draw some more examples, you know, because when you're just looking at a drawing, it's not relevant unless you have some sort of stem angle to look at and see how much elevation you may or may not have, you know, from the valve, because that's where you're headed. So and it also kind of shows that, like, let's say this, my purple here sort of represents 20-ish degree, and then this is purple here. You could have a similar amount of turn degrees in this purple line. So it would theoretically be a little bit lower port than if you had a port that started off on this red line but went to more of a straight up valve stem angle. So what you want to do is sort of figure out what your short turn angle is from the deck, and then you can minus out your stem angle from there, and it'll just give you an idea of how much turn angle you have. But yeah, the format, you need to establish your format based off of similar engines. So when you're trying to develop an efficiency curve like this for a particular cylinder head or something like that, it really does need to be based on formats that are similar, because there's just so many different geometries out there. All right. Okay, now we're gonna spend a little bit of time in the Cologne zone because we just ran so long on that last video. We just didn't get a time to talk about where we've come from here. So we're gonna go back over to the screen and we're gonna get in on this. So let me look at some stuff. Right here in the pink, this was about the best we were able to do with the stock valve at this point. And so it was in the mid 154, 155 or something like that. And then when we got out, it kind of droned along, had a slight drop off, but it was fairly stable. And then as we decided to move on to the 2.9 valve, like I talked about a while back, we actually were able to achieve a little more flow, and then we got it to hold on even for a lift point, and that's at 400. And then after that we had a really sharp descent, and I think this was 12 or 14 degree tulip, but that's all I had at the time. I didn't have my 2900 valves. So like I said the other day, the head seems to prefer a 20 degree, the actual 2900 valve, and it was able to achieve a very similar flow. We had a slight descent, but then she came back and kind of held on going off the page. So that is the best looking flow curve that we've had to date on the project. About 160 CFM. So I'm sure there's always more in something. I'm just, it's as brave as I want to be. I'm removed about as much material as I feel good getting out of it. So after talking about the modifications on the vent port, the red we know is the baseline from the vent port, and then I went ahead and did a baseline on the center port. We're just going from weirder to more conventional as we go. A slightly more mid-lift flow, pretty much the same on the top end. So that's the baseline for the center port, and I haven't modded it yet or worked on it, just no time for that yet. But so we'll pull off those, and then we're going to talk about exhaust here real quick. The exhaust is a strange looking exhaust port for sure, but it works okay. I mean, we don't need a million CFM here. So that in red right here, this is our stock baseline. It's about 96 CFM. And I mean, it's just a pretty good curve all the way across the board. Nothing big. 96 CFM isn't much, but and then from there we went ahead and we ported the stock exhaust port, and I just modded the valve a little bit. It's 25 degree tulip, so kind of like some of the mods earlier. Back of the head, the forging's a little uneven, but just I didn't really, it's not a back cut, it's just taking the sharp lip off. and matching the tulip angle. So, you know, the port job and the valve work, the valve thing really helps in here. Okay, that's where when you mod the valves, you see the gains. The port work, you know, is out here. So about a 20 CFM gain from 96 to about 116. Okay, and then from there, we went on to the 4-liter size valve. So 2.5 millimeter gain. And then I trimmed it in the same fashion, matching the tulip. And I think we went up to about 126. So same deal. You know, somebody might be able to get more out of it, but it flows enough. It flows enough. 126 CFM is enough to work with 160 CFM exhaust port. So basically that's where we are right now. And these are my actual Ford valves. So this is the Stalker, this is the 4-liter Ranger. Now I got that, and then these are the 2900. And right now, like I showed you before, I'm still holding that valve job line is cut for the stock valve. Okay, I don't really recommend, or you know, boring the throat over about 1.410, because you got to do some layback work on this short turn to get this thing to go. And the bigger you bore the throat, the more it wants to stand your short turn up, and the less stable your port gets. So I'm not done with this intake valve job thing yet. I'm just, honestly, I'm thinking, because I've gone to battle with this thing. We've thrown some blows, and I think I've got my head wrapped around where I'm going to finish out. But right now, at this moment in time, I would say if you want to run 2900 valves, you know, set the valve seat for like the maximum position on the stock valve, and then you know, what would be way out at the edge of the valve, and sink it a little bit to get some top cut, and then just throw your 2900 valve on there. At this moment in time, that's given me the best flow curve, and I've duked it out. I've even done some pretty crazy stuff. I even put an intake seat back in one of these things because I was getting pretty weird and doing some pretty crazy valve angles, and I saw some little things there, but it wasn't so far, like it wasn't the solve I thought it was going to be. You know, it did show some glimmers of hope. I saw some higher flow numbers than what I've seen as of yet, but it was as erratic as that other valve. So it wasn't as stable as this setup is. So yeah, the one thing I keep wanting to tell you guys to do is you keep hearing me complaining about the stability problems we're having, but I think what you'll find is if you go research, look at pictures of the 2900 head and even the 3-liter Ford. They're very different designs, but I think what you're going to notice is on the 2900 head, they really drew the chamber in around the intake valve, and that, I think that was intentional. And then if you look at the 3-liter valve, the 3-liter head, it has a very bathtubby looking chamber, but what you're going to notice is they shoved the valve up against the chamber wall, and I think that was their way of simulating sort of controlling the curtain area, right? So if you take a look at just some very short history after this engine ended, and you look at the engines that came out in '86, you'll see that around the intake valve they took some very different approaches. All right. Anyway, guys, that's what I can tell you. We're not done yet. We're still looking, but for John, Jeff, here we are doing it, and have a good one. Be good.